All right, so good afternoon. For those of you all who don't know me, my name is Derek White. I'm the Multimedia Education Coordinator here at Montgomery Community Media, and this is our Lunch and Learn series, how to take your virtual production for an MCM broadcast, right? How to take your current production and convert it over to a virtual broadcast. Whether you've been doing field shoots and airing that to the network, or you've been doing studio shoots and airing that to the network, now you'll be able to take this other skill set of, hey, let's create virtual productions and then air that as well. And this time that we are in with this pandemic and our crisis, both here and the future, we don't know, when we're going to open again. We're not sure, even once we open, when the studios are going to open, when we're going to be able to start to go back to businesses as normal. Leadership is really working to do that in a safe manner. And so as more information comes, that information I know will be sent out to you. So in the meantime, this is a way to bridge over and transition to keep your productions still moving, still active. You still might have information, knowledge out there that you want to get to your audiences. So this is a way for you to keep your production still moving in the same direction, in the direction you want it to go. All right, so over the next about 50 minutes, we're going to go over the operational setup. We're going to briefly talk about some of the things you need to make sure for both you as a producer and your host or guest. I want you also to be mindful as we're going through this. This is not teaching you how to become a producer. For those of you on board that are not producers, we are going to work with you, and we're trying to create a producer's class for virtual production, right? For those people who still need to kind of learn how to be producers. This will still be good knowledge for you. So I don't want to, I'm not taking that away from you, but I just want you to be cognizant of aware of what you're actually going to be receiving in this workshop. Okay, so we're going to talk about the operational setup for your production. We'll go into still the same thing, kind of the pre-production roles. How does that look in the virtual for a virtual production? What production roles do you need to be able to successfully complete your production? What's the flow of the show? How does that look, versus being in the studio or being in the field? And then we'll wrap it up looking at the post-production and what do you need to bring it full circle and get your production on the air. Okay, so let's take a look at the operational setup. This is looking at an MCM, from an MCM perspective, what you need to be able to host your program here at MCM. Now, one of the things I want to make you aware of, this is one way to be able to produce your show virtually. There are a lot of different ways to be able to achieve the same goal, but what we work to do, both myself and working with the education side here, as well as working with the production side, we worked on a process that we've been putting together ourselves. For example, the production side has recently done a virtual production for Studio 501c3. The education side, we actually just recently, just Monday, we hosted our YTT yesterday, today, tomorrow. We just did that Monday. So we're also working through the elements of, what is it that looks good and what works and what doesn't work. And we're all in a learning phase as we're trying to kind of bring this together. And so we're here to also share that knowledge with you. Okay. So for your operational setup, coming in as a producer, you need, there are a few elements you need. We're looking at using Zoom, as you see here, as the basis for your video conferencing. There are others out there. There's Cisco, WebEx, there's Skype. And if you have that ability, you have those accounts, you know how to use those, you definitely can leverage those for your productions. We're not trying to put any type of restrictions on that, but this is specifically looking at leveraging Zoom and all the features in it for you to be able to complete your own shows, your own virtual shows. Okay, so with that said, what is it that both you, your hosts, and guests need? Well, some basic things. You need a computer, right, or a laptop. And you might be able to get away with it your guest could probably get away with if they have an iPad. I've seen on, like, then CNN has done some shows where that a person actually had their smartphone, mobile device that may work. All of this, you're going to hear me say over and over again, to test all these features out before your production, see what works, what doesn't work. Everyone across the board is doing this, new latest and greatest, and really trying to maximize the virtual world and see what works for them. So the same goes here. Everything that I'm telling you and that I'm going to share with you, you're going to hear me say over and over again, hey, test this out. You want to test that with each of your guests and see what works, what doesn't work. So you need a computer and a laptop. With that computer or laptop, you need most laptops, and even some, like, for example, the iMacs, they have internal cameras, which work very well. If you don't have internal camera, then you have to buy a webcam, and they're not that expensive, and they can actually, some webcams, it might be even smart for you to get a webcam as opposed to your internal camera, because some of those actually are even better, right? They have a better resolution, better look, better quality, right? So all the things you can look at and research out for yourself. You need some type of a microphone. Again, laptops usually have an internal microphone. Actually, some of the iMacs do have an internal microphone. Test those out, see how those work. Typically now they've gotten a lot better over the years with the internal microphone, and they sound pretty decent. Going over to an external microphone is probably even though better. As you see, I'm using a headset to do this production. You probably should be capturing that this is a little bit better clarity in this mic that I'm having versus using the my iMac. iMac does have that I'm on does have a microphone, I believe, on it, but I'm kind of sitting a little bit farther away, so I already know that quality is not going to be it's not going to be as clear and concise as I'm using this here. Granted, I have this device on here, so for aesthetics, some people might not like the aesthetics behind wearing this for their presentation. So there are better ones out there that are less noticeable and cleaner, so you can look at this. This one was like $40 and it works very well for me, and I'm fine with using this for what I'm doing. Okay. And then next and most important aspect of all this is you need a network. You need some type of a broadband network connection. I did a series a couple of 2 or 3 weeks ago on running a great virtual meeting where I really kind of went more into depth on this. I'm just going to quickly highlight some important aspects, but I won't get into as deep as I did in that series. I recommend you, when that does come out, go and check that out. And I might have some even further tips than what I'm going to give you here. But what I do want, I think is still important, that I'm trying to let more individuals know, producers, guests, as you're putting these shows together, what is it you need to set you up for success to make sure you have a good, clean LAN network signal, and you have a high bandwidth that's good enough for you, the host, and your guests to be able to have a good running show where you don't have still frames, where your video doesn't stop, and you're having audio problems. These are all things that little things you can do that you might not be able realize that you can avoid. So right off the bat, to test, let's say, for yourself and see how this works for you as you're explaining this to your host and guest, I always say, get on your computer and do what we call a speed test. If you Google speed test, there are a lot of different ones out there. I use this one that's here. It's by Ookla, Ookla, but Google has one, Yahoo has one. There's a bunch of them out there. See what works for you. This one that I'm showing you works very well, and I like it. And the reason why is that I put 3 of the graphics up there. One shows you, of course, the initial page. The second one is the actual testing testing of your bandwidth. So once you hook your computer or your desktop up, then you start the bandwidth test, and then take a look at the speedometer. All right, so there are two speeds that you're really interested in, and that's your download speed and your upload speed, right? Your download, literally, without getting too much in depth, is looking at what the information you've got coming in, right, that you're downloading. So that data bits that are coming in, bandwidth speed is measured in megabits per second. So you're looking at those camera feeds that are coming into your laptop versus your upload speed is your camera that's going out to the into the world. All right, that's kind of the quick down and dirty of it. There are some other aspects you kind of look at when doing that. Typically, I like to use, for every participant you have on your call, about 1.52 megabits per second for each participant. It's kind of just a good value you can kind of look at to see, hey, what can I do and what kind of speeds do I need to make sure that I'm okay. Here at MCM right now, we have we call it 50 up, 50 down. So I can, when I do my test, the one that you see here on the final results is actually mine that's at home. And with the 10 down and 14 up, relatively speaking, I can take about maybe 3 or 4 people on my call, and then I might be okay, right? But what, for me, another problem was, when you look at the bandwidth, also look at, take in consideration how the bandwidth, how that speedometer is moving. Is it dropping? You know, is it staying pretty much close to whatever you're supposed to have at your house or place of business? If you see that dropping in and out, then that's also something to take into consideration. So these are just a couple of items just to take a look at. Once again, at the end of the day, go back, take a look at and just test it for yourself. No better way than just to seeing what kind of results you get. If you have other questions about this, I'll be happy to kind of talk about this and get more into this at a later date. Okay, so with that, let's talk about the pre-production process. So before we start, MCM's actually also, we're learning and trying to transition into what is this virtual production going to look like in the future, right? And some of that is based on you guys, like what kind of productions are you doing? Are we going to have a lot of productions? Is this becoming very popular, or we really need to look at some of the business process we have in place, right? So right now, as we're looking at that, I've mentioned, if you are a producer currently, you have a show, you're interested, you want to jump on board, right? Well, we don't want to stop the process. So you can currently, right now, you would do your studio, right? You would get on board, download your studio production, your treatment sheet, and then fill out all your information. So we're going to tell you to keep on doing that for right now. All right. In the future, we might see a virtual production treatment sheet might be made. It's really only half of what you see in the studio. I believe like steps 1 through 7, you're looking at the who, what, when, where, why, right? You know, your topic, what is it you're trying to do? You know, who are your guests? Do you have a host, or you're the host? And then you know, and then on top of, when are you trying to do this, right? So those are kind of the aspects, real quick, down and dirty, what you're looking for. So still keep with the studio virtual treatment sheets right now. For information, especially when you get into the studio crew, obviously all that's not applicable anymore. So where you see what's important, you start from there. And once you send it in, Dee Willett, who actually is also on this call, she will work with you and myself to be able to get you set up so you can have a successful event. Okay, then next we're looking at the producers. All right, you as a producer, what is your next step? Well, right now the next step for you is what I call business as usual. Okay, you still have to determine your topic, right? Research what it is that you want to talk about, do your research behind it, right? And then determine and identify your guests, and then go and work out your questions, your wraparounds. You still need to do all of it, right? The pre-production work of a producer, that part doesn't change, okay? So once you have gone through that process, right, you've identified your topic, you know your guests, all right, now doing that treatment sheet, you're going to schedule that Zoom video conference call, right? And on that Zoom video conference call is where you're going to work with us. Now, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to sidetrack where you can work with us. One of the things I want to mention about Zoom is you can also create your own Zoom account for free. Zoom allows you to do have a one-on-one unlimited time, right? If you're doing a Zoom call, it's just, so if you just want to go online and you and one other guest, talk back and forth, and then you can do that, so you can do a 30-minute show, you can do an hour show, what have you, okay? Once you do 3 or more people, there's a 40-minute limit per session, right? Unlimited sessions, but it's a 40-minute limit per session. Okay, so I encourage you to go out there, try it for yourself, play around with it, see how these kind of things work for you, because as a producer, you're going to need to know a lot more of these avenues of kind of, hey, what's the ins and outs, what works? We can talk to you and we're happy to work with you all day and all night on this, right? But at the same time, seeing it for yourself is the best way for you to kind of see what results, what works for you and your type of show. Producers out there, we all do things very differently with our own shows. So it's a matter of how you're taking your show and integrating it with using Zoom, what works best for you. Okay, so I want to caveat that out there. But let's say, hey, you don't have that ability, maybe you don't have the network, you don't have the time, whatever the case is, but you still really want to do a show, or you might just need some assistance and help. Well, we're here to help and assist you with that. So, which is why then I put that scheduling Zoom video conference call in there. Once you do that treatment sheet, and you've worked with Dee and you all have done that pre-production side, and she sees, okay, yep, we see you have a show, which direction you're heading in. Okay, let's go work with your guest in determining what kind of date, what works for a date for a shoot, and then we'll schedule that. Okay, and so what'll happen is we'll schedule that within Zoom on our side, and then from there, we will send you a copy of the invitation. We'll email you, the producer, a copy of that invitation. And when that invitation has the times and also the link to be able to get into the room on that day of, as well as information, some key Zoom information they need to know. We do have a passcode that's on there, and as long as you use that link, you're good to go. We ask that as a producer that you only send that to your guests and your hosts, the people that are going to be on the show, and make sure that the hosts and guests do the same. They don't send that somewhere else. There was someone I know from a colleague of mine. They wanted friends to go onto their virtual productions, and that's not happening here. And for a lot of good reasons, right? One is bandwidth. Looking at the bandwidth where we're at, where you're doing your show might become an issue. But the more people you kind of have on in your show, the more complex and complicated it can get, right? Especially for some of your production members, and specifically your Zoom moderator, which we're going to talk about here shortly. Okay, so keep all those to only the people who need it, and you kind of go from that point on. Okay, then next, once you've done that, you've determined you have your guests, we recommend right now that you have a max of 1 or 2 guests starting off. And along with, let's say you have a host, maybe you as the producer, you're also the host. So you keep it kind of limited. And the reason for that right now is just so you can see as a producer what works for you and what's working in terms of you doing a virtual production. Does the bandwidth that you have, speeds that you have for your guests work? And we're also going to talk about, when we get into the flow of the show, what methods or what ways, how did that show run? How did you actually do the interviews for the show? We'll talk about that. Okay, so here we're taking we're using an example. I'm going to kind of you'll hear me use YTT as an example because we just did that show and it's fresh in my mind. We had 2 guests for that show, and we had our host. and our floor director, and then myself, right? So looking at your interview locations, we're going to talk about now, let's look at, hey, as the producer, you want to get with your guests now and do what we call that site survey, right? The site survey literally is what typically you'd go out as a producer to wherever you're going to be shooting at to determine right, those key requirements. Where is the camera? What's the lighting like? What's the sound like? You know, what's my power requirements? But here for virtually, it's a little different, right? But at the same time, same type of purpose that what we're looking at. What does that virtual look like? So a couple of things you want to make sure you ask your guests. One, you want to also let them know that this is a Zoom event. Find out from them what kind of devices are they using. I talked about that operational setup. You might need to go over that operational setup with them. Maybe they know, maybe they don't. Okay. Find out for like video, you know, are they using an internal cam? Are they using a webcam? Do they have an internal mic, you know, external mic? Do they have to do a phone dial-in? All right, there is a phone dial-in feature too for Zoom, and I'll talk about that in a little bit later. So taking all those things in consideration, and make sure you want to make your guests and hosts also aware this is a production. Some guests you might find say, hey, yeah, I got this because it's I've used Zoom all the time. I use it in all my meetings and all my conferences. I've led meetings and I got all this locked down. Well, that's all great. But this isn't a meeting. This is a production that's going to be aired for broadcasting. All right. So it's a little bit different mindset that they just need to transition to, hey, this is like you being in a studio. This is really you being in a studio on air, and we're recording you for broadcast. So it's a little bit different thought process behind that. Okay. So having that conversation, just making sure they're on the same page really will help make even a smoother transition when you're doing your show. Okay, so for the virtual site survey, when you're talking to your hosts and guests, what are some things that you need to remind them of or let them know? First, make sure you let your guests and hosts know they should find a quiet room as possible. All right, right now I'm actually in an office location. I am at MCM because the bandwidth here is much faster, and I know it won't have a problem. But of all the places I could go, I wanted to make sure I was in a quiet room where I know the sound. You should be getting pretty good sound from where I'm at. Okay. I talked a little bit already about the different types of microphones. Sound is really, really important. Just as I know many of you are aware as producers, bad sound can really ruin your show. Well, the same still goes here virtually. Don't cut out or don't dismiss your sound. Hey, yeah, it's great you got the video, but what's that sound look like? You know, test all these features out if you can beforehand. An external microphone always works the best if you can do it. Internal microphone is just as good as better. If you need to use a phone app, or let's say one of your guests, needs to use a phone app, well, that's okay. We recommend, because the phone app, for some of you might not be aware of, Zoom actually will make your guest's phone act as if it's using the computer. All right. So as your guest is talking on the phone, it's going to come straight through the computer, and you won't see most differences. There is one I'm going to talk about here. If they decide to use their phone, it's better if they have a Bluetooth or some type of a hearing earpiece or headpiece that they're wearing. A lot of times on a lot of the shows that use phone apps, you'll kind of see someone wearing that, and that is much better and even gives you a pretty good quality sound than using the phone itself. Either talking on the phone, right? You're going to be talking like this, but that doesn't work. That's not a good look, right? Or some people want to use the speakerphone, and the speakerphone is the worst possible case scenario. If you don't need to use the speakerphone, don't, because as you're using the speakerphone, you're getting feedback now through the computer. You can get some echoing. It's just doesn't sound good, and it actually could stop your show if you're not careful. All right, if it gets really bad. All right, so test all that out. That's a worst case scenario if you have to do it, but it's better than to see if you can find another route or another way to go. Okay. All right, so that covers real quick on some of the audio features. Take a look too and make sure to remind them the same thing applies. Take a look at their sound. What's going on around them? Right? Do they have any excessive noise? Partly while I just started this presentation, the air conditioner just all of a sudden came on. All right, I think I'm okay, a little bit better here because I'm in the mic. So yeah, no. So in the back of my head, I'm thinking, okay, how is that going to sound when we actually go to edit or post? All right. So all those kind of things you still want to look at. Make sure you talk to them, ask, we are in a time of, this is a pandemic we're in right now. So there's also the possibility of, family members around, spouse, children, are you able to be in a place for, 15, 20, 30 minutes where you can have a little bit of quietness for the purpose of having a smoother show. All right, so these are all conversations you want to have prior to. Okay, then next we get into the video aspect of it. Okay, so some video tips we want to also look at. You should have your guests and hosts seated in a desk or a table. When you are setting up, you still want to make sure you have that camera, right, as kind of evenly as possible, right? Take that camera right to as much eye level as possible. Sometimes you have laptops, right, that are pointing up. And so now you're the guest is looking down onto the camera, and that it'll work, right? We've in this day and age right now with everything going on, we're a lot more forgiving with the way our cameras and audios look, but we're still looking right for that center of excellence. So where you can fix the little things that can make your presentation look good, you really should try to aim to do that. So making sure that your camera is still eye level. Sometimes that might mean you have to put, like if you have a laptop, maybe you need to put it on some books or a box, to get it, centered and eye level, and then making sure they know what's going on around them. You don't want any distractions. If you have to be in a room with family members, try to keep from family members who are running around behind you. Any access of glares, that kind of thing, you want to keep from behind you. And then transitioning on to, most importantly too, is windows. Windows can be sometimes a problematic issue. When you don't have your hosts or guests, wouldn't have them have a window behind them. And the reason why is because most of the time, a lot of you might have already seen this. Your camera will focus on your window. That window is really high, is a much higher it's outside daylight, so we're talking about higher Kelvin temperatures. So sometimes, especially if the sun is out, you can almost get that, that 5,000, 5,600 Kelvin really gets bright. And so your camera's focusing on that, and then your guest becomes much darker, and sometimes you can't even see it. And at times, also depending on the camera, that person can come out of focus, right? So take a look at those kind of things. Have them instead, your guest or host, reverse that and put that in front of them. If they can have the exterior window in front of them, it gives them much better light. At the end of the day, you want to be in a well-lit room, have a well-lit area. You don't need to worry about trying to do the, 3-point lighting thing. Really, typically, that doesn't work for internal cameras. It can if you really know what you're doing, but typically it's over the top, too bright. Keep it simple for your guests and your host. Just have a nice, balanced, well-lit room. As you can see, I don't like fluorescent lights, but for this purpose, it looks good. I might bring in some other light. I have a little daylight in front of me. It's a cloudy day, so I don't have that much light coming, but it's balanced enough, and this works for doing a virtual production. Okay, so all those kind of elements you want to keep in mind and take in consideration while you're talking to your hosts and guests and testing these out. And again, like I said, test it out. You can look at the setup, but nothing is better than, hey, let's go ahead and get, we can get a free account, or let's see if we can get a, a sound check, kind of what would be literally kind of like a dry studio run, in checking out and looking at your setup, um, through your guests and your hosts, through the camera, right? So that's really important, as you're really trying to bring all this together. A lot of still moving pieces to this, right? There's still a lot of little elements, and the little things really are what count to create that solid piece. Okay. Okay, so now we're going to get into the production roles. So what is it you need to be able to pull off a virtual production for broadcast? Now, granted, for MCM broadcasts, but ideally for any type of broadcasting you're doing, what do you need when doing this virtual type of recording? Okay, so you as the producer, of course, paramount. Nothing happens without the producer in play. You need a host, whether you are the host. It's also a possibility. YTT Mariana is our Corday is our host and producer for the show. She does have other hosts. Maybe eventually she'll start bringing other hosts on as we're working through this. Don't know yet, but that's something that's out there that to still be discussed, right? You need your guests, like I mentioned, 1 or 2 guests max. You can go farther if you know that you're comfortable with it. You've tested this out. You can go further and do 3 or 4 guests. I recommend you keeping to 2 guests, but if you're comfortable with it, go forth and conquer, right? I don't necessarily want to push restrictions. This is all what we're doing. What we're talking about is just good guides and tips to help you with your productions, right? Then you have what we call your floor director, right? Your floor director really is also your director, but for your productions, working with your host, this person is going to give you cues. They have cue cards, right, that we make up, and with when to begin the show, when your 10 minutes, 5, 3, 2, 30 seconds are up. We have cue cards that are actually placed up into the camera for the host to see. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when I get into the flow of the show. All right, I'm going to come back to Zoom Moderator, which is really in the added piece in here that's a little different. And then finally, we have your editor, right? And your editor is going to be really important, because for most of these shows, what you want to do is look at capturing that interview, right? You're really trying to capture the main meat of the show is the interview portion, right? Yes, you have openings, you have closings, you have lower thirds. All of that is recommended to be able to put in post. Can you play video on here? Yes, you can play video on Zoom. I know you can play video on WebEx, but you're still going to need an editor in some way, shape, or form to fine-tune that, right? These devices were not thought about as using in a environment for broadcasting, right? But so sometimes might be a slight delay. Maybe you want to tweak that delay out and take some of that out. There's some little things you're looking at. So you're definitely going to need an editor at the end of the day to bring this all full circle. Okay, let's go back to the Zoom Moderator. All right, so the Zoom Moderator, I put on as a kind of a keynote to help people kind of understand their role. They're really they are the studio technician. And it's really good if you can find a studio technician that's doing this, because they still understand. Studio technicians know behind the scenes, the flow of the show. They know kind of the ins and outs of what needs to happen for the show, right, to set you up for success. So just as a guide, as a reminder, the Zoom Moderator is really the added extra piece to this virtual event that we haven't had before. Okay, so what role do they play? So they're the technical expertise during the show. They're monitoring the video cameras and mics, right? They can do communications via chat. For example, there have been some things going on you might not have probably noticed, but a couple of times I might need to talk to. There is a moderator for this workshop. Now, granted, this is a presentation. It's not, we are recording it for broadcast, so same type of element, but this is a one-on-one. But at the same time, the reason why we have a moderator, so then I don't have to worry about all the technical sides of what's going on in the workroom, right? The participants and their questions that come up, and so on and so forth. Okay, so a Zoom moderator is really important for making sure, really keeping that balance in the show and keeping things kind of moving. And that allows you as the producer to focus on the content of the show. And that's really important, right? It's so easy to get wrapped up when you think you want to try to do it all. And you can do that, right? But I think you will be able to take a better breath of fresh air when you know you can focus on the content and you can actually pay attention to the conversation, the guest, the host, what's happening, what's not, and then what elements do you see that you might need to fix. You know, is your production still going in the direction that you want it to? And we must not still lose sight on, though we're doing this new virtual thing, the main focus still is on what's the topic, and did you achieve your goals for that topic that you're trying? What goals are you trying to achieve, and was that a success? Okay, if you're sometimes focused so much, you're trying to focus on everything in the technical aspect, sometimes that can be that could get carried away and you get pulled in another direction. Okay, so how you going back very quickly and looking at, yes, the producer can also be the host. A Zoom moderator can also be your director and floor director, right? I mean, they can do both of those jobs ideally, but I'm recommending that you keep those jobs separate right now, all right? If you can, find people, individuals that can do those and just focus on those key items, and it'll make that 30 minutes, or for those of y'all who want to do an hour show, go much, much faster. Okay, so now we get into the flow of the show. The flow of the show is it's not business as usual. For some people, it might be, and what do I mean by that? Typically, and when you come into a studio, you know, we have your opening, we have a wraparound, we have the interviews, we might have PSAs in between, we throw up some lower thirds, we might have graphics in there, all right? Then we're closing it up with the closing and the credits, right? And after that, you are done and out. And now you have this what is probably a 30-minute show that is probably pretty close to broadcast, right? Maybe you need to do some slight edits and some slight tweaks, okay? But for here, right now, most of what you're doing is with focusing on just capturing that interview. What does that look like? That should be your focus, okay? So for example, I'm just gonna throw YTT out here. So I was the tech moderator for YTT. Dee Willett was actually the floor director. So with Mariana being the host, I literally started off we did a preliminary check with Mariana to see how her look was, see what she needed, see where her camera was. We did all that actually the week prior, all right? Then we actually for the day of the show, we came into the show, we had everything set up, and I'm not gonna get in as a Zoom moderator gets into a whole nother conversation in terms of there are a lot of different settings that you can talk about. You know, who's pin video, gallery view versus speaker view, how you're recording your view. Are you recording it just in a pin video mode? Or are you having the audio capture who changes as the cameras change, the recording audio is doing that. That's also another element. As you are getting ready for your productions, we'll work with you and work with you on those aspects. Those are things that you can also, like I said, go on your own to do, but we can work with you on that and getting that nailed down. So for our show, we actually did have 2 guests, and we recorded those 2 guests for YTT separately. So we actually did, both of them were in the room, but while the first one was being interviewed, the second one was in the room, but their camera and mic was off, okay? And Dee did the same thing. She actually, once we were ready, started recording. She held up a cue sign for the host to begin. She started off her opening just like normal, then transitioned over and introduced her guests, and then went into with the first guest having a conversation. And they had a great back and forth conversation for about 15 minutes. 5 minutes prior or 10 minutes prior, floor director puts up 10 minutes, 5, 3, 2, 1, 30 seconds. And then at that 30-second point, what we already had talked about prior to was only needing about 5 seconds. We're not going to stop recording, because for Zoom, you can pause the recording, but it doesn't actually stop until you're done with the meeting. But no need to do that. We'll just go ahead and keep recording. Need about 5-10 seconds for me to unmute the second guest, turn on the second guest camera, and then by that time, Dee's already, our floor director's already put up, hey, Mariana can begin for the second guest, right? And she sees that second person also come up, right? And within her view, she sees that second person. All right, their camera's on, so we can begin. Hey, we're back from the show. And then they start off with the second part of that 15-minute segment. So once they've done that, they've wrapped all that up, right? And the same thing on the back end of that next second part of that guest, same thing applies. Dee does that 10, 5, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, what have you, whatever cue cards you're putting out there to wrap up the show. And once that's done, all right, then you can actually stop recording. For Zoom, once you stop recording, when you end the meeting, it's actually going to convert this video for you. All right, it's going to convert a video over into an MP4. You're actually going to get an MP3. You're going to actually just get the audio too. And you get what we call a playback version. It's called M3U. I won't get into that. You can kind of look that up and see what that's all about, but it's a small playback used for other things. And then you kind of go from there, right? And then once that video is converted, you can save that video, and recommend you can save it to your computer. Now, Zoom does allow you to save also to the iCloud, but we don't recommend that. I haven't done it myself, but one of my colleagues, Adam Wyatt, on the production side, I think he tested it, and he said the quality wasn't as good as when you actually save it to your computer. So don't record to the iCloud, record it to your computer, save it into a folder, what have you, and then you can work, whether using Dropbox, Google Drive, when you're all done with it, to send it back up, okay, to send it to us so we can air it. All right, and finally, we have our post-production. Okay, so the post-production really isn't that far off from what you normally will do in your show. One of the things I do want to make mention is I talked a little bit how the recording feature works. And the way I told you the recording feature is one way to do it. Right now, I know MCM the production side is actually looking to record on, you can actually record on both your guest and your host cameras, right? And have all of those video footage sent to one person, and then you can do a multi-camera edit, right? And you can do maybe a side-by-side with your guest and your host, or you can do all three of them if you're in that conversation, right? There's other things you can do, right, to really take it to the next level. But we're not talking about that today. We're not talking about that here. Just kind of pointing out there are other elements, other ways, and other places you can take leveraging Zoom or whatever video web device or app for you to so you can really have a professional looking segment of broadcast production. Okay, so recording is the same. When you export it out, one of the things just to remember when you're exporting, once you've recorded it, it's going to export to that file footage. You're going to have these 3 files. So I recommend you putting that into a folder. And once that's said and done, then you can go ahead and go into editing. Now, if you follow the direction in the way that I'm talking about, in doing your guests separately, you are going to wind up needing PSAs. You need something to transition from your first guest into the second guest. Mariana, actually, when that 30-second after that first guest was done, she did hey, we'll be right back after this break. We're going to add a couple of PSAs to that, and then come back for the second guest, right? You as a producer, I think you can determine what you like, what it is you want. That's just kind of a recommendation. But now you have this piece that really you can cut out the non-essential pieces and then add those other components, put your opening on there, your closing, and put your opening, your closing, your credits, your role, everything else that you're looking for, and you can kind of go from that point. And then now, what we haven't talked about too, and we haven't done, is then B-roll too. If you're thinking about wanting to also add B-roll, I highly recommend it. We still in this day don't want two talking heads. So if you have B-roll to go toward that conversation between your guests, that's definitely where you want to add that in post. Okay. Right. And the fastest 50 minutes ever. That was like really quick. Okay. So what I gave you was a really 1-hour synopsis, right, on kind of showing you where MCM is going and what we're doing, and giving you a platform so you can start doing this yourself. Okay. Once again, I said this, we know and understand that everybody's learning to do this, but we really highly recommend you jump on board with this. Even after once we open, we're not sure when we're going to start doing studio productions again, right? And I do know, and I can tell you, this portion, this Zoom is not going away. We're looking to eventually integrate this into our studio. So maybe you do have a guest or a host that is far away, maybe they're in another city or another state. And you have a host that's still maybe in the studio, but maybe you want to do an interview and do a Zoom interview and bring them into the studio. So you can do that, right? So we're looking at ways as how we're going to even take Zoom or video conferencing to the next level. So I can tell you that right now, this isn't going away. This is something that I think is here to stay. And it's a good way to really, you don't have a lot that you need to have a really nice production and bring it together. Okay. So, I hope that was educational for you in that hour. I know you probably have a lot of questions. What I'm going to do though, I'm going to close this session out, and then I'll come back and we can do questions and answers.